Archaon has travelled the mortal world for years, razing everything he finds to the ground. Now he's in Faerun with a whole new world to burn. So how exactly will the Everchosen of the Chaos Gods translate into Baldur's Gate 3? Well, let's get to building him and find out. This is another one requested in the comments, so if you want anyone else, let me know down there. As always, we'll be starting with a spot of character creation since you can't have a build without having a character first. Way back before Archaon was ever the Everchosen, he was born human as a result of a less than enthusiastic copulation between a possessed champion from the Norscan Varg tribe and an innocent Imperial woman during a raid on his village of Hagendorf. That is as gentle as I can say that, whilst hopefully avoiding YouTube nuking this video 30 seconds in, so I hope you get my meaning. All this means that he is a human, so that means standard movement range, couple of weapon and armor proficiencies, a bit of a generalist, and good carry capacity. As for his looks, we don't really know a lot about him, since he's always shown to be wearing his heavy armor, which covers every inch of his skin. I went for a heavily corrupted and decayed look, since being away from the light, both literally and spiritually, for that long will take its toll on a human body. I took a few creative liberties with this and decided to give him some cultist looking scars, along with runic tattoos covering his face to give him a nice corrupted look. Ran that off with demonic glowing eyes and a friar tuck hairline, and here we have my version of Archaon. If you want a handsome Chaos God, you should have asked for Siggy. As for his class in Total War, he's an excellent battler with high armor and damage, whilst also being a powerful caster with a range of spells focused on damage and debuffs. In his lore, before he became Archaon the Everchosen, he was instead Diedrich Kastner, a devout Templar of Sigmar, or the Twin-tailed Comet if we're being specific, but let's be honest, pretty much the same thing. After travelling to Sigmar's holy temple and begging for aid in overcoming the knowledge of his birth, only to be met with silence, he denounced his faith and turned to chaos to burn the world to the ground. As such, I'm going to be doing a spot of multiclassing into Sorcerer later, but for now we'll be starting with an Oathbreaker Paladin. We can pick a subclass, but all Paladins start with the Lay on Hands action, allowing them to heal in melee range, and Divine Sense, which gives him an advantage on attack rolls versus certain enemies, both at the cost of oath charges. This does mean you'll need to pick an oath to create him, and the closest to Sigmar is probably Devotion, but again, we're going to break this as soon as we can, so don't worry about it all too much. This is probably the easiest to break quickly, which is what you want if you want to get to the Oathbreaker abilities and playstyle as quickly as possible. It doesn't particularly matter, but this will start us with Holy Rebuke, allowing us to deal radiant damage to anything which attacks a target, and if you're interested in exactly what a devoted Paladin believes in, it's walking straight into action, helping those in need, and obeying laws. Boring. As for his background, I chose to go with Acolyte. This fits his background as a Templar pretty well and gives him some nice booster rolls, which, spoiler alert, he's going to struggle with due to stats. Speaking of which, here's ability points. Because we're going to multiclass into Sorcerer later, I want to make sure we're good at both general battling and spellcasting. It just so happens that both Paladins and Sorcerers use the same stat for casting, and that's Charisma. So, from the top, 17 Strength, which of course will be great for general combat and big damage. 12 Dex, since honestly, just didn't have the points to spare. 14 Constitution to make him a tanky lad. 8 Intelligence and Wisdom, since we really need the points and he doesn't particularly need them anyway, so it's all good. And lastly, 15 Charisma. Is it a little weird that I'm making the guy who just burns everyone to the ground a low-key king of Riz? Yeah, but you need it for the spells, okay? And lastly, his skill proficiencies. I went Athletics, Perception, and Intimidation. Athletics is pretty self-explanatory. He's pretty much peak power as far as any mortal is concerned. Intimidation is also pretty obvious, and going to be the primary way he gets things done in conversation. And finally, Perception is there to give him a hand with his low wisdom and keep him aware of his surroundings, which of course the Everchosen always is. And with that, we can get into his gear and playstyle. As I mentioned earlier, Archaon is all about big armor and big damage. So armor first, and we're of course going for the heaviest stuff we can find. You want enemy swings to bounce right off, he's so tough, so find the best you can, and if it comes with any special abilities, even better. Grab him the horniest helmet you can and keep that face covered as much as possible. If anyone sees that hairline, the Everchosen is going to be known as the Everbalding. Throw in some metallic gloves and boots and a furry cape and a lot of black dye, and he's ready for anything. As for weaponry, in Total War he uses a flaming longsword and a shield, and lucky for us, that's pretty easy to replicate in game. You might not get the flame straight away, but a sword and a shield we can definitely manage, giving him even better tankiness and some decent damage. He has no range in Total War, but for convenience sake, I'd go with heavy crossbow. This matches his heavy style and is a nice callback to the Empire, who are of course known for some pretty great crossbows. In battle, his playstyle can be somewhat of a one-man army. While he can easily do this in Total War, Baldur's Gate might pose a little bit more of a challenge, but still get him into melee combat as quickly as possible to dish out some devastating damage, whilst also soaking up as much damage coming towards you and your party as you can. Throw out some spells here and there for even more damage, and always keep the aggression up as high as possible to keep pressure on enemies and the damage coming hard and fast. Outside of battle, he's quite literally put on this earth to burn it to the ground, so I think that's a pretty straightforward goal to translate into this new world. First things first, breaking that oath, and you can easily do this by attacking the tieflings who captured Lae'zel without even attempting to persuade them to leave. After this, you can go talk to the spooky guy in camp, and boom, you're now an oathbreaker. Keep up the evil and chaotic choices by slaughtering any signs of peace you come across, bend others to your will with shows of force or cruel magic, the choice is yours. It's honestly a pretty simple playstyle to adopt, since you pretty much have the same solution to every problem you come across in the form of death and destruction. You'll take enhancements to your power no matter the cost to your humanity or the innocence lost in the progress. And yes, that does mean the gummy worms are fair game to get all the power you can. As for companions, honestly it's a real struggle to find anyone that's quite as hellbent on destruction, but your standard dark companions are fine choices as long as you help them cultivate their darkness and slaughter the necessary innocents to unlock them in the first place. So break the oath, seek as much power as possible from any source you can, and burn the world to the ground. Simple as. Once you've successfully broken your oath, we can get into how to actually build up your very own Everchosen. Since Oathbreakers are their own subclass, they replace whatever you chose at the start with just one action, Spiteful Suffering. This allows you to place necrotic damage on a target each turn, whilst also giving advantage on any attack rolls against them. Now for the levels. At level 2 we gain a spell slot as well as the ability to spend one to deal extra radiant damage when attacking enemies, which actually refunds on a miss, which is pretty rad. We can also pick a fighting style, and I'm going defense for some extra tankiness, and since none of the others really do as much good or fit the theme. We can also use that spell slot on one of a number of spells, and I should probably mention that Paladins unlock all of their spells and choose to prepare certain choices, rather than unlocking new spells each levels like Sorcerers and other casters. At any time outside of combat you can just swap their spells around, but in the interest of keeping things easy to follow, I'll just go over which spells I'm preparing at each level, and you can assume that I'm sticking with them for the most part. So, first up, I'm grabbing Command, Wrathful, Thunderous, and Searing Smite. Command will allow us to bend those around us to our will through force, and the Smites will allow us to imbue attacks with various kinds of damage and stats effects for even more devastating melee. At level 3 we gain the Divine Health feature, granting us immunity to disease. We can also command an undead until a long rest, and unleash our darkness to frighten nearby enemies in combat, both at the cost of an oath charge. We unlock 2 oath spells, Hellish Rebuke and Inflict Wounds. Hellish Rebuke will allow us to react to attacks with fire damage, and Inflict Wounds will allow us to deal necrotic damage to enemies in melee range. Neither of these need to be prepared, and both cost a single level 1 spell slot. Lastly, we unlock another prepared spell slot, and I'm going to go with Compelling Duel, to force an enemy to fight us in combat, essentially allowing us to taunt key enemies. Level 4 we gain another charge of Lay on Hands to do more healing, which makes no sense, but not really a way to get rid of it, so what can you do? We can prepare one more spell and honestly run out of options that make sense, so just pick up whatever you fancy and we'll probably drop it later. I went with Heroism for some extra tankiness. Finally, we can pick up our first feat, and I went with Warcaster. This gives us advantage on concentration spell saves, essentially allowing us an easy time maintaining spells. And we can use Shocking Grasp as a reaction to deal some magical damage to retreating enemies if regular melee wouldn't suffice. At level 5 we grab an extra attack, unlock some level 2 spells, and pick up a couple of more oath spells. Darkness, which obviously lets us create a cloud of darkness to blind enemies, and Crown of Madness to inflict madness onto an enemy in combat. We're going to swap around a couple of spells to end up with Command, Searing, Thunderous, and Wrathful Smite, Compel Duel, Magic Weapon, and Branding Smite. Magic Weapon will allow us to deal more damage by imbuing our weapon with magic, and Branding Smite lets us deal extra radiant damage and prevent enemies from turning invisible, but we're mainly just here for the extra damage. Level 6 we gain the Aura of Protection, granting allies a 0 bonus to saving throws. Not sure if that's a bug or Oathbreaker just doesn't give a damn, but pretty funny either way. We can also grab another spell, and I'm going Protection from Poison. It says allies, but we all know we mean ourselves to keep poison off us. Dead easy, dead simple. At level 7 we gain the Aura of Hate, which grants ourselves and any nearby fiend and undead 2 extra damage with melee weapons. Sure hope it means allied, otherwise this is pretty stinky. We can also prepare yet another spell, and we're getting really low on options, so pick up Heroism again for some more tankiness. Level 8, our final Paladin level, and we gain yet another prepared spell, and none of the remainders make sense, so just go with whatever you need in your party. I went Cure Wounds, and I'm planning to selfishly heal himself as much as possible, even though it makes no sense, but you know what, it makes as much sense as anything else here, so why not? We can also grab our second feat, and I'm going Heavy Armor to get us to 18 strength and make him as obscenely tanky as possible. Level 9, and now we're going into Sorcerer. Honestly, you could do the multiclassing whenever you want, but showing you like this keeps things simple for you to follow, so follow your heart when building your own special little Everchosen. So right off the bat, we can get loads of stuff with our new class. We can choose 4 cantrips, and since I'm focusing on damage and destruction, Bone Chill, Acid Splash, Firebolt, and Ray of Frost. Damage in a variety of flavors and colors, what's not to love? We can also grab a couple of tier 1 spells, and I'm going Burning Hands and Chromatic Orb. Even more destructive damage either close or far, so fits perfectly. And lastly, we can pick our subclass. Wild Magic makes the most sense here, since his magic literally does come from the forces of chaos. This grants him the option to gain advantage on a number of rolls and gain surges of wild magic, tossing out a variety of effects when it bursts free. Level 10 we gain our first sorcery point, which can be spent to replenish spell slots or activate spell modifiers, which I'll come to momentarily. We can grab another spell, and I'm going Magical Missiles for some extra long range damage, and lastly we can choose 2 spell modifiers or class passives. I'm going with Twinned and Distant. Twinned lets spells gain an extra target, allowing us to toss out more damage onto the battlefield, and Distant grants spells more range, meaning no enemy is out of reach from our power. At level 11, it's more spell slots and sorcery points. We can also grab our first level 2 sorcery spell, and I'm going with Scorching Ray for even more fire damage. We can also grab another passive, and I went with Quicken spells, allowing us to use spells as a bonus action, essentially meaning more actions per turn. Finally, at level 12, we gain one last spell slot and sorcery point. We can pick up another cantrip, and I went with True Strike to get us a little bit more damage in melee. And for our final spell, I went with Hold Person for a little more debuffing utility to close us out. And finally, for my last feat, I chose Savage Attacker. Simple? Yes, but damage in melee is never a bad thing, and when playing as this guy, it makes total sense. In the end, you have an exceptionally tanky boy with a lot of frontlines capabilities and damage. He can throw down in melee with just about anything and dish out as much punishment as he takes. As well as this, he's a devastating caster with a strong focus on offense and damage, with the odd buff and debuff tossed in there for good measure. He works great as a leader of your party as they join him on his quest to raise Faerun to the ground, and can work just as well as a tank as he does an artillery cannon. He does surprisingly work quite well as the party leader for conversation too. If you're role-playing as the Everchosen, most conversations will have the same conclusion, but still, you can intimidate your way into a lot of adventures, so he works great as a party leader in combat just as easily as out of it. And that's my Archaon the Everchosen build for Baldur's Gate 3. Let me know if you change anything down in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and if you want more Baldur's Gate 3 content, then check out this video of my noob mistakes to avoid when getting started.